Hello, welcome to the training webinar for this week. I'm Dale Franks, and this week we are going to talk about accessibility and responsiveness and how to implement them in your Process Director applications. We have some fairly extensive documentation on accessibility and responsiveness. I dislike talking about accessibility and responsiveness as if they were separate topics. They're not really. They are largely the same thing. Responsiveness is part of accessibility in the sense that the point of both of these features, accessibility and responsiveness, are to make your forms easily accessible, navigable, and readable on any viewport for any browser, no matter what the size. And so responsiveness really is a subset of accessibility. As I said, our documentation is fairly extensive when it comes to accessibility. We have an entire section on accessibility. If I can figure out where the BP Logix documentation website is, if you go into implementation and implementation guidelines, there is an accessibility section there. Now, this accessibility section is fairly long because it does cover all of the major accessibility principles. So there's an introductory page, and then there are the different principle pages. And some of these pages are actually quite long. Now, the nice thing about this is that this is not really Process Director information. This is information that is, well, I hate to say imposed because that's the wrong word, but that is suggested by the World Wide Web Consortium. And so these are the accessibility guidelines from the WCAG. So they don't change much. And so if you go back to the accessibility topic, there is there's a link to the WCAG. There's a link to our VPAT. Our VPAT has a lot more technical detail, I think, and a lot of unnecessary detail for regular use, but there is a PDF that you can download that contains all of the information that we have in our accessibility principles documentation that is on the web. So it does go into quite a lot of detail about what the WCAG standards are. There are code samples where appropriate. I think there's a couple here so that it sort of defines how you might need to do stuff. Now, this is for HTML, so you would have to use the HTML control to implement some of these. For the most part, you don't have to do that. For the most part, Process Director handles a lot of the accessibility stuff for you, but you should be aware that this is documented, and the documentation doesn't change much because it doesn't really matter what version of Process Director we're on. We still have to ensure that for the end user, the accessibility guidelines are imposed properly. That's for end users. If you are a designer or an implementer, the accessibility features don't really apply to you. It's almost impossible to impose accessibility in a design environment because the design environment is kind of a blank page. To the extent that we can, we do, but the point of accessibility is really not for the development tools, and Process Director is a development tool, not for end users, obviously. It's a regular application tool for them. But for the development tool side of Process Director, WCAG standards don't apply. Like I said, we'll try to work them in where we can, but the development tool, Process Director, as opposed to the applications that your end users see, does not conform to the WCAG standards, And of course, in most cases, it would be an impossibility to do so for development tools. We're in a sort of a different paradigm on the development side than we are on the end user side. But on the end user side, you can and should make accessible forms. A lot of the accessibility is built into Process Director. However, well, certainly for responsiveness, there's a lot of responsiveness built into the way that we display forms to end users, and it's forms, of course, that end users largely interact with in Process Director. The other accessibility elements are on you as the designer to implement. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, what you can do to implement these accessibility standards. And the first thing we're going to talk about is an object that doesn't really have any accessibility standards. It is exempt from some of the accessibility standards, and that is the image control. When you place images on a form in Process Director, certain types of images like this, which is a logo, are exempt from a lot of the accessibility guidelines. Logos especially are exempt because they're a matter of corporate branding, and so therefore they fall outside the purview. And so when we look over here, we talk about, compliant contrast color. There are standards, and we'll talk about them in just a second, along with how you can check them, about the amount of contrast between text and colors that have to be implemented on a web page. Logos are exempt from that. So this logo, for those of you who can see it, there is that blue swoop with this sort of I don't know if it's a teal or a green. It's kind of a tealy green or maybe a greeny teal, but the difference in color contrast between the BP Logic's swoop and the background color there are very, very small. So that amount of small contrast would violate the standards normally for color contrast. And the reason that we have these color contrast standards is so that users who are visually impaired, can easily see the differences between colors or easily see the difference between text and background. But for logos, those color contrast standards do not apply. However, because it is an image, other standards do apply. So if we select our image, there are some accessibility standards that must be met for an image, irrespective of whether that image is a logo or any other sort of visual image or indicator on the page. Once you put an image on the page, you need to ensure that disabled users who are using an assistive web device can tell whether that image is important, can tell what that image is. And so there are some attributes that you have to place on the properties of an image control. One of which is the alternative text. You have to provide a text alternative to an image anywhere that it is possible to do so. So this is the Process Director version 5.0 logo. So this is the logo that we created back in the day when we first created Process Director 5. And you would place a logo like this on a page, irrespective of whether the color contrast met the WCAG standards, which specifically is one of the reasons why I use this logo. But you still need to have the alternative text. Even though it is a logo and it's largely on there for decoration, you need to tell end users that the logo is there. There are a couple of other properties that you need to, or a couple of other properties you need to keep in mind. One is the long description URL. Now, this one is optional, this long description URL. What it provides for a user who's using assistive devices, and by the way, I'm not going to keep saying using assistive devices over and over and over again, because that's going to get super tedious. So I'll just say when the user sees the page, or for the user. We'll just assume from now on that that user may be using an assistive device. What the long description URL property provides is a URL link to a page that provides a fuller description of what the image is. So if you have a complex image like a flow chart or something like that, which for a form you probably wouldn't have, but for general purposes, if you had a complex image like that, you might need to provide a full text description in HTML about what that image is showing the end user. So the long description URL is a optional property that would enable a user to open that URL and then be able to read or have read to them a full description of what the image shows them. Generally, this is not needed for a logo, but since that was the image I was going to put on this page, I decided to link it to the explanatory page for Process Director on the main BP-Logix website, which is perfectly fine to do, by the way, as long as there is some page that the user can go to get that full description. Again, this is an optional property. Less optional is the advisory title. There are some devices that will look at that advisory title for additional information as well, in addition to the alt text. So the advisory title is, I would say, less optional than the long description URL, but you do need to have an alternative text, and it needs to be filled out so that there is an alt text, which, by the way, doesn't just work for assistive devices. If something were to happen to the image itself, it's stored on a server that whenever the user opens the page, the connection to the server doesn't work, or that server that stores the image may temporarily be down, or whatever the problem may be. It could be a comms error, could be a server error. That image just doesn't get served. Well, in that case, that's fine, because in place of the image itself, this text will appear in the image placeholder. Now, obviously, the image would have to be large enough to display the text. If you have some tiny little, 16 pixel by 16 pixel icon, it's obviously not going to display all of that text. However, what it does display is a broken image link, which if expanded, you can see that alt text. Now, in this case, I've got the image, so I'm not seeing the alt text, but what I am seeing, if you look, notice when I roll over the image, it pops up with this Process Director 5.0. That is my advisory title. So one of the nice things about the advisory title is that it shows up generally in, I think, in Edge, Chrome, and Brave, and I think in Safari, although this is a PC and I don't have Safari running on it. I'd have to actually get my MacBook out just to check on it. But what the advisory title does is it shows as a tooltip over any of the images whenever you have it turned on, or whenever you provide a value. So I get this Process Director 5.0 when I mouse over the image. If the image was broken, and you know what, I would have to actually go back and check now, and you moused over it, if you have an advisory title, I think the advisory title is what shows. If you don't have an advisory title and it is a broken image, I think the alt text pops up in a tooltip. But that's going to be super browser dependent. But it doesn't matter. Whether the image is broken or not, with an assistive device, the alt text for that image is going to be read out to the user anyway. So you're going to need that alt text. The alt text is the one property that you really have to have. Every image needs to have an alternative text representation for accessibility purposes. So a few minutes ago, I said, the onus for a lot of this accessibility is on you. And this is a prime example of that, where whenever you drop an image on a page, all of these properties, the alternative text, the long description URL, the advisory title, they're all going to be blank. So whenever you drop an image on, it's one thing to just upload your image, send it to the server, and then go over here and decide what width and height you want on it and think you're done. Sure, for you, from a visual perspective, you're done, but from an accessibility perspective, you're not done. You have to provide all of these additional properties, and that'll be true really universally as we go through this form and look at all of the different different things that you need to implement or that need to be implemented for accessibility purposes. So let's go back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago and talk about this issue of contrast colors. There are, in the WCAG standards, there are various levels of accessibility conformance that you're going to be judged by in terms of how accessible your form is. Generally, we refer to these as 1A, 2A, and 3A. And I probably should have kept this open rather than closing it. But if we go back to the doc, go back into the implementation guide, and go back into accessibility, let's look at the accessibility principles page. There's a little definition here. The levels of accessibility in the WCAG standards: level A, AA, and AAA. And if you want to see the WCAG standards, which is the original source for all of this accessibility stuff that I've written into the documentation, it's right here. Boy, is this a long set of documentation as well. Now, the reason why this is probably going to be less useful to you is that it is for creating sort of standard HTML pages and general website design. We have really a smaller subset of that we worry about in terms of Process Director, because we're really talking about form design. And so while there are some general overall principles, there are a lot of things that you're just not going to do, right? I mean, you're not going to have, other than a logo, you're not going to have a whole bunch of images on your form. And there are a lot of other elements that you're simply not going to use in a data input form that you're providing for end users. So I think you'll find that the documentation at doc.bplogix.com is probably much better focused towards Process Director and the accessibility guidelines that you need to keep in mind. But this level A, AA, and AAA level of compliance is important because, depending on where you live, we'll just talk about North America for right now, there is the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is the Accessible Canada Act is kind of weird because it doesn't really have a lot of specific guidelines in it. On the other hand, in Canada, as well as in the United States, there are various state and provincial accessibility laws that you need to comply with. And in Canada especially, some of the accessibility laws are quite strict. However, I think we have to say in general that you are required legally in those jurisdictions where these legal requirements exist. Check your local jurisdiction to ensure. But in general, the legal requirements in North America are to comply with the AA standard of accessibility. AAA is way more strict than AA. AA is kind of a happy medium. So we're going to proceed with the assumption that we're all trying to reach AA compliance. So now that we have this idea of compliance and the compliance levels, now let's go back and talk about contrast colors. For any images that you have, oh, one thing I forgot about images. You should not use images of text if it is at all possible to avoid it. Again, doesn't apply to logos. You can have as much text as you want in your logo. You probably shouldn't, although some logos it's kind of unavoidable. Just a logo that said 5.0 wouldn't be very helpful. It's got to say process director because it's something 5.0. So yeah, there's text here. Logos, of course, are exempt from this requirement of no images of text. But there is a WCAG standard that explicitly says, if it is at all possible, do use text and do not use images of text. So just needed to mention that. And I was thinking about it a few minutes ago, but it slipped my mind. All right, so let's go back to contrast. What we need for every object on the page, and especially for text, is an acceptable amount of contrast between the foreground and the background. And to be legally compliant, that level of contrast has to match the AA level of compliance with the WCAG standards. So what is that contrast ratio? Well, to meet the AA level of compliance, there must be a ratio of 4.5 to 1 of contrast color between the foreground text and the background. I think most of us would not know, just looking at something, whether it was a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. So happily, there are tools that assist us with this. My personal favorite, I really like it because it is so cool, and it also tells you what level of compliance you're reaching, is this tool here. It is at contrastchecker.com. In fact, let me make my screen a little smaller so you can actually see. That's the URL, contrastchecker.com. Now, this is a super contrast checker. It is the one that I use all the time whenever I'm trying to figure out colors and try to make them work. So let's take, for example, our steel blue color, which has the HTML hexadecimal color of 528 BBC. Yes, you are going to need to know what the hexadecimal colors are for this to work. Every HTML color has a hexadecimal value. A lot of colors have a named value in HTML. So for example, red is a named, well, not RREED. Oh, this does require, had never tried to do that before, but it does require the hexadecimal. So that would not be the right color. I don't think RREEDD is actually a hexadecimal color at all because R's aren't used in hexadecimal. So let's go back to 528 BBC. So this won't allow you to use named colors, but you can get the hexadecimal colors really pretty easily. So we're going to use that as our color. So there's our foreground color, and there is our background color. And down here are all of the little accessibility balloons or circles that tell you whether you are accessible or not. So as you can see here, I have a ratio of 3.63. So if we look down here, my AA button is red, my AAA button is red. So I failed AA and AAA. However, if my text is over 18 points in size, then I do pass AA because the The success indicator for over 18 points is a little looser because larger text obviously is easier to read. So because this is 18 points, this passes accessibility, which means that on my form, it passes accessibility here too, because it's larger than 18 point. So I can use it and I meet the standard. Now, if I really want to meet the standard, and I go back to my contrast checker, if this color isn't close enough, there is a little button here that if I click it will open up a foreground color picker. Now, I just want you to notice on this foreground color picker, these little circles that we see on the main page are also replicated as squares inside our color box. And what this color box allows me to do is sort of fiddle with this color and move it around. So there is this outer wheel where I determine what color I want in general. So as you can see, it's set over here to this bluish color. And then inside in the triangle, it allows me to adjust the darkness and contrast along the three legs of the triangle for darkness and contrast. So if I really wanted to meet double A, I could pull this up here. Okay, there we go. We just saw it just right up, right there, pop. It popped to double A. If we look here on the background, it says ratio 4.6. So this color meets double A. So it is not my regular process director steel blue. It's a little darker version of it, but it actually is compliant at the double A letter or at the double A standard for letter sizes of less than 18 points. So as you can see here, there's a 12 point text sample. So I can use this to, pull my colors around and I can set foreground and background colors. So this is also great if you're using buttons and you're trying to do buttons, because as we'll talk about a little bit later, the foreground color of button icons and text also has to meet that ratio of 4.5 to 1 with the background color of the button. So I find this contrast checker really useful, albeit in the real world rather limiting when it comes to picking the colors that I have to use for accessibility rather than the colors I might want to use for buttons. For example, if I was to set the foreground, and now this is white, so I think it would actually work. What is red? Is red FFOO? FF. Stop it. Oh my goodness. Delete. What is going on here? FF. F. Okay. Well, I say I like it, but it really is making it unpleasant to use. I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm going to refresh that screen. And I think it's FFOOOO. Is that red? No, it's not O. It can't be O. It can never be O. It has to be zeros. Yes, that is red. Red text on a white background is not compliant at the WA level, although it is compliant at more than 18 points. So, there's a lot of times where we want to use red or we want to use green. And here, let's just pull this up. HTML. I got to find out what the hexadecimals are. So that's the hex. Does this give me a named color? HTML, sorry. Let's go with HTML named colors. So we'll go back to W3C schools and I want green. So I'm going to search for green. So there's dark green, olive green, dark sea green, forest green, green, which is 008000. So if we go back here and go 008000, and this green is compliant. Okay, great. So if I go green and white, or I might want to do it the opposite. Let's say I was looking for buttons and I wanted to see what the button color should be at the front. So we'll go with white to start off with because that's standard. Okay, green with white, that's cool. We kind of like that. So this would be an accessible button, and this would be an accessible green, the named green in HTML. But what if I go with yellow, which will be 0000FF, I believe? No. Um, all right. Well, see, that's why we're bringing up the color names. So we will just search for Control F, yellow. Oh, I did not hit Control F. I hit Control D apparently. Control F. Let's try that again and go with yellow. So there is my green yellow right there. Let's where is yellow yellow? Yellow yellow. FFFF00. Okay. So FFFF00. That's yellow. Okay, we can get away with green and yellow. Cool. Can we get away with well, obviously we can't get it. Okay, so FFFFOO, which should be yellow. Let's just pick yellow there. Oh, that's the background. Cancel, cancel, cancel. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do the 0088. Uh-oh. Well, it's doing it again. All right. Well, we're not going to play around too much with the contrast checker. It exists. You can probably figure out how to use it. The important thing to know is you have to be able to get the appropriate contrast colors, not just in text, but in buttons as well. So this is an example here where I actually use our regular BP Logix color here. It's great, but I can only use it at 18 point. And this is the similar color that is AA compliant. So when you see them side by side, you can actually see that the fully AA compliant color for sizes smaller than 18 points would be a noticeably darker shade of steel blue. By the way, I didn't mention it here. We might as well go back and take a look at it. If I run this form, so and I think it'll be easier to run it if I open up the content list and I go back into the folder and I just run it from here. And we'll have to give it a second to compile because I'm sure I've probably inadvertently saved something, so it needs to recompile the form, which will take us a couple of minutes. But what I want you to concentrate on is the title bar of the page whenever the page finally does load. And if you look at the very, very top, you'll see where it says accessibility form submitted on, the after on is blank because it hasn't been submitted, dash, and then work, and then Microsoft Edge. So this accessibility form submitted on is part of the, and I don't think I have anything here. So I'm pretty sure I have one that I've already submitted, but let's go ahead and submit this one anyway. And we have that. Let's submit it again. It must start with a capital S. Okay, well, let's try it with a capital S. And there we go. Our form is submitting, and it should now go away. Now I'm inside my timeline activity. You can see I have accessibility buttons. I just want you to notice that I do have a little darker green. I'm going with yellow and black for the contrast and a little darker red because I want to use more accessible colors on my buttons. So we're getting the appropriate level of contrast. And I'm just going to go ahead and close this. But because what I want to do is I want to open up this form now that I have submitted it. So we'll go on to our form instances. Oh, I did have some that were submitted. So we didn't really need to do this, but okay, now that I open up my form, now if we look up here at the top, it will say accessibility form submitted on 2/27/2025, 10:33 a.m. So that is my instantiated form name property, which is on the properties tab of the form definition. Now, this is the default instantiated form name. So this is already pre-filled out for you. Now, as a best practice, you should change this instantiated form name to some more unique value that is specifically associated with each form instance. So it should probably contain some sort of request number or other unique value or values that you could use to identify specific form instances once the form has been submitted. But by default, we place this property in every new form or form definition that you create. So there is already a default instantiated form name. Again, this is an accessibility requirement. You need to have that unique name that identifies that page, in this case, a form, that is going to open up for your end users. So it's an important little item. We'll talk about this a little bit later, this access key property, because it does come up, but let's talk about it when we get down here and we're talking about form controls. So we'll put that in abeyance for a second, although I will get rid of that extra unused line there. Most of the time in Process Director, we use tables as layout controls. Really haven't been, you should have stopped doing that 20 years ago. Technically, if I was creating a regular HTML page, I wouldn't use tables to create the page layout. Now, we still do it in Process Director. We do it for a couple of reasons. First of all the browsers generally handle tables exactly the same way in HTML, and they present them the same way to end users. So they're predictable, which is great, but it's not really the reason why we do it. The reason why we do it is because Process Director is designed for non-HTML developers, non-designers, non-IT people to have the ability to go in and create forms with appropriate training on the product. And tables are an easy way for people to understand how to lay things out. And because all of the different browsers handle tables properly in terms of how they're displayed in the browser, and there's not a lot of variation between that display, they're also a convenient way for people to understand how their page is going to look before they display it. And then when it does display, it displays in the expected manner. Technically, you should be using div tags. And actually, in Process Director, you can use div tags, but they're really inconvenient to use if you don't know HTML and you're not a HTML designer. But, well, I have a customized UI, and I still have the customization that I imposed on it in the customization webinar. So I don't have the div. Oh, no, I do. Yeah, I do. I thought I got rid of it, but you do have the div container control. So, I mean, technically, you can use div controls. I wouldn't, because the tables are easy to use. So if you're using table for general layout, The table caption is not really necessary. However, if you're not using it for layout, for example, if you are presenting data in a table, so for example, I want to use a business value to take a whole bunch of array controls and fill them with data from a business value. Now, I don't want people to fill these out. So as we've done many times here, I'm going to set all of these form controls as disabled, and I'm going to set my form on the Properties tab to show disabled fields as text. What that enables me to do is to use the form as kind of as like a simple reporting tool. I can slap an array on the page, disable all the controls, and then I can just fill the controls via a business value. For example, if somebody puts in a search term or what have you, and then it just fills the array, grabs some records out of a database somewhere, and it makes a form into a kind of a little report. And that's fine. You can do that. But when you do, there are some table properties that you need to set for accessibility purposes. So if we take a look at this table at the top, now I just have text in here because I really want us to see what the end result might look like rather than to fill out an array. And of course, if you're doing it in an array, rather than having header cells here and here or labels there and there for what the contents is, they would most likely be arrayed across the top of the top of the table. So your first row would be where all of your headers were. So those are details. Those aren't important. We will talk about those details later. But in this case, I've got my labels on these two columns, and I've got information in this column. It's hard-coded, but the principle would be the same if I was grabbing this out of a database to display as well. We have to go into our table properties. So for this table, we go into our table properties, and there are two things that are important. One is the caption, which we set, which in this case is called informational table caption. And when you set the caption, it will appear here on the page. And I also need a summary so that I can describe what data I am displaying in this table. So your summary in a form that you have created to sort of display a report in an array, well, then you would need to have some sort of summary that explains what that report is. So anytime that you use a table to display data, then you do need to have that caption and the summary for that to be fully compliant. Again, the assistive device, when it comes across that table, is going to inform the user of what the caption says and what the summary of the table is so that they understand the type of data that's being displayed in that table, even in cases where they can't actually see the table data themselves. So you need that. Now, I've also done it down here in this second table, this employee information table, where if we look at the table properties there, there's my caption for the employee information table, and here is my summary. In this case, even though it is in a section and I've just got these four fields, I would at least think about whether I should, I don't know why it keeps skipping on me like that, but that's weird. I am having all kinds of visibility issues today. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not entirely sure why my browser is being wonky on me like that. Let's try her again. Can I highlight items now? Yes, I can. Apparently, I clicked on something that didn't have the appropriate property filled out. So again, if we go down here to this table, you can see I've got my caption and I have a summary inside the table properties for this particular table. It's not a bad idea to do that if you're going to use a table like this, even though, I suppose technically I'm still using a table for layout. And so I don't necessarily need a caption. The summary is not a bad idea, however, even if you think the caption, as a matter of visual display is something that you don't want. It'd be good to have the summary in there anyway on your table, um, just so that you can have it set properly. Now, there is a difference between these two tables, and it goes back to what I talked about headers a few minutes ago. This table has headers. So one of the accessibility requirements is if I'm just going to be displaying data. So once again, let's assume that we're displaying a report using an array, and we're just binding that array to the result of a business value to create a simple report using a form, which is pretty common. Well, wherever my labels go on that form, those need to be header fields. And you need to mark which of the fields on your table are going to be header fields. So again, if we go back to our table properties here, there is a headers property. And by default, you can set, when you create a table in the online form designer, you can set either the first row, which I think is probably in the context of a report by far going to be the most common place where your headers are. You need to specify that the first row in that case would be the header. Now, in this case, I have two columns. I specify the first column as the header. However, I have these two additional cells in this column. And so if we were to highlight these cells and go to the cell properties, I can individually take a cell and mark it as a header cell, which is what I've done for these two cells in this column. So all of the cells in my first row, or my first column, obviously with this configuration, are headers, and all of the cells over here in this column are headers. And if we go into column 2 and look at our cell properties there, the cell type for these cells is data. So data should go into data cells, and header information, non-data information, should be marked inside a header cell itself. One of the other things that I've done for my header cells to sort of mark them off as visually distinctive is that I've given them a very light blue background, but with black text, so I ensure that I have the appropriate color contrast between background color and text. But now I've got a table that an assistive device will be able to notify the user that, hey, this is a header, this is not real data, this is just a column. And we'll do the same thing down here on this table where I do have an array, and in this case, it's a data entry array where I would actually fill out data. And that's fine if I just go to my cell properties for that first row. That is a header row. And in most cases, when you're using an array, this is whether it's a report or whether it's a data entry, this is what it's going to look like. So if I go back in and I go to my table properties, well, I should have set the first row as headers. I did not. I think what I did is I went into each of the individual columns, as we saw just a minute ago, and I made each individual cell a header. So what I probably did is I just copied, or I just highlighted those cells and set them as a header, which is fine. You can do that. It is a lot easier if you just go into your table properties and just set the first row as headers. But these are all header rows up here now. And so whenever a user opens the form, they'll be able to know where the header and where the data entry rows are. If we look at this next table, though, there are no header rows. And the reason there are no header rows is because of the way assistive devices work. Back in the day, I always used to use this sort of format for putting my labels in, and then in this cell, I would put in a control, right? So this would be like last name, and then I would name this control last name. And I would think, hey, that looks really cool. I've got this great design. But I don't do that anymore, haven't for several years now, because of a very important accessibility consideration. Every data entry field that you create for accessibility needs a label. And if I put my label over here in this table cell, and I put my data control over there in that table cell, that's going to be a bad thing, because the assistive device that the user is using, are you going to let me delete this or not? No, you're not. Well, fine. We'll just reload it. The assistive device is going to get super confused because what it expects is the label and the control to be co-located, and it expects it to be in the same cell. And this is just one of the drawbacks of assistive devices. If I have a label in this cell, it wants the data control associated with that label to be in that cell. So even technically, while you have a label and you have a data input control, which we'll pretend this is, and the label is connected to the data input control. And in fact, if you were to click on the label, it would activate this data input control whenever the form was running. It's going to mess up assistive devices. So in a table like this, where I'm actually doing data entry, so I actually am using a layout table here, I need to put my label and my control into the same table cell, with one exception. And that exception is, again, arrays, because arrays have their own unique type of label. So let's take a look and compare and contrast the two types of labels and what we need to do to make a label work. So this label is employee name. It has its own label name. It has its text that I want to display, which is, in this case, employee name with a colon. It's got its style, which is our BP Logix dark blue color 082F4D, and it has an alt tag. So once again, anytime that you see any process director control, if there is an alt tag property, you need to provide a text alternative. So labels have an alt tag, images have an alt tag, buttons have an alt tag. There are several different classes of controls that have alt tags or alt text. It'll say one of those two things in the properties dialog box. If it says it, you need to supply it. With a label control specifically, you need to associate the control name for that label control. So this label control is the employee name label. The associated control ID is the employee name control. So this user picker control, if we pick it, as you can see, it is called employee name. So you have to have that direct link between your data entry control and your label. This will enable users to go from fields to field simply by noticing, oh, and you can also navigate to specific fields by name if the label is associated with the data entry control. So it's very important that you fill out the alt tag for labels and that every label has an associated control ID. Now, some of you do a thing which is to create just a label control on the form to use it as kind of like a free text display control. I would urge you to stop doing that. I would recommend that you stop doing that because, again, the assistive device thinks that a label control is associated with a real control. And the label control is not there to be used as some sort of free text display for a designer. It is there to implement the accessibility features of labels and activating controls. And when I say activating, I mean passing focus to a control via the label. And each label technically must be associated with a data input control. And I've seen some of your implementations, and I've seen some of you just slap labels on a form because you want to display text in that control. And sure, it's convenient, but you shouldn't be using the label control for that. There are alternative methods for throwing in free text. For example, you can create your own variables or your own system variables or your own custom variables. And you can use system variable controls to change themselves to whatever value you decide to set for that system variable, or well, it would be a custom variable actually, but you'd be able to, just change a custom variable or a session variable for a user. Those would be the recommended ways of setting up free text, not using labels. Now, there is an exception to this, and it's something that we've built into Process Director for you. We've made it really easy for you without you having to worry about what control goes where. And that is a special type of label control, which in this case, I have created inside of a system variable control, but it is the array column control. Now, there is no UI placeholder for the array column control. It is only available as a control tag system variable. So hence, since it is a system variable, I've used a system variable control to run it. So if we run this form again, and I have saved it, so it is going to take a second for it to run. But if we run this form again, you will see that where it says column 1 here with a numeric 1, it's going to say something different when the form finally decides to open for me. Is the form going to open for me? Did I not hit save and run form? Okay, I'm just having UI prop. Well, that certainly is not what I wanted to do. Okay, well, that saves it. I'm not sure why my save and run form isn't working, so I'm going to have to close back out of this and just run it from the content list. And if I do, that'll be fine. But let me be sure that the little spinny stops spinning here. Is it 11 o'clock already? Oh my goodness. Okay, well, now save and run form works fine, which means I'm resaving it when I really didn't need to. So now I'm wasting even more time as I watch the clock go tick-tock away towards noon. So let's save the form again, and in the fullness of time, at the appropriate juncture, the form will open. And let's look down here and we can compare and contrast, as I used to say whenever I was a college professor. We can compare and contrast the text up here, which is column 1, with the actual display text here that I've put into the control, which I did intentionally so that you could see the difference between the placeholder label that appears here and what actually appears in the form whenever the form runs. Now, this is a special label, this array column system variable. It is a special label that only works with array controls. It's specifically designed to work with array controls. And so with arrays, it's kind of tricky, right? Because I'm going to have this array, and who knows how many rows it's going to have, 4, 5, 6. What I don't want to have to do is to place, if I have, 6 rows in an array, I don't want to have the department label replicated 6 times for 6 different controls. Oh, and by the way, these controls will all have unique names. Well, they'll all have unique indexes. So it's all tricky. So therefore, what we have done is we have built a special label control that can be used as the label for arrays. All you have to do is toss it in the very first row of a table. And then assuming that the second row is where your array starts, this becomes the label control for the array. Also, and I really should have kept that open form, shouldn't I? So let's start it from here because it'll just start a lot faster. And let me reopen the form here real quick so we can come back to it when we're done. So let's take a look at this array. So, well, actually, we want to take a look at these. So let's take a look at these tables up here and take a look at this array. I'm going to try to do this so we can see all of them at the same time. So, oh, it'd have to be pretty small. There we go. It finally did it. It finally moved. Well, it took a while, but we got down to the size where it moved. So in this table here, you'll note that whenever my form got smaller, what happened on my table was it all went to a single row. And what we do is we reorder the table to display. So it basically goes, sort of evensies, oddsies. I'm going to assume that my first cell is the very first row. The second cell of row one will be second row. The third cell will be the third row, and so forth and so on. So in a case like this, where I actually have 4 cells in a row, it's actually going to make, whenever it refactors that table, it's going to make basically 8 different table cells, my 4 header cells and my 4 information cells. Similarly, in this case, where I only have 2 columns per row, it's again going to put them into a single column, and it's just going to go through every other row, or every cell actually is just going to make a separate row. And so it's just going to go from left to right, top to bottom, however many rows in my arrays. Most of the time, it's only 1 row. Or however many rows or however many columns, are in my table. Usually, it's just going to go left to right, top to bottom, and resort them in a logical order. So it's just going to go, like I said, left to right, top to bottom, and every cell is just going to become a row in a new refactored table. For an array, let me add another row. What's going to happen whenever it gets down to the smaller size is that the array column control, whenever we refactor the array column control is actually going to get repeated for each row of this refactored table. So now we do have the appropriate label for each control in the array whenever we get to a small form factor like this and we refactor the table. By the way, this is not something that you have to do. It's not something you have to do if you're a subscription customer, a cloud customer. If you are a tiered customer, this is probably something you're going to have to do, and you have to do it through CSS. So that's on you. But this behavior of refactoring the tables for everybody else, except for the last few holdouts on the old tiered license scheme from 2017, Process Director is going to do all this for you. And if you make the screen bigger again, when the array comes back, you'll be back to the regular array column display. So these are special little label controls that we've built for you in Process Director, and we have them set up so that whenever they refactor, those array column controls just get associated with the appropriate control. So, by the way, for this to work, it is super important that your array be in a table so that we know what columns to associate with what text control. So we're actually going through the table counting what column they're in so that we know how to do that association. But all of that association happens automatically for arrays as long as you use the array column control. Process Director will know what label to associate with what control whenever we go to, a phone-sized viewport for that control. A couple of other things to think about when it comes to accessibility. We've taken a look at this employee name. You notice that the name for this one is employee name. If we go to this drop-down, the name is location. This drop-down, the name is due date. Those are all pretty common names. There's no weird programmer syntax, text underscore, form underscore, txt underscore, last underscore name. We don't do that. We just give things normal names. We can't have spaces in the names, but that's fine. We can simply give them the normal name that is logically associated with what that control does or the type of data that it stores. So we just need to ensure that we don't use weird names for our controls. Our end users, remember, as they use their devices, our end users, the device will tell them what this name is. And if the name is FRM underscore TXT underscore last underscore name, that's going to get super tedious super quick for your customers. If the field is just employee name or due date, it becomes obvious to the end user what data that field stores. So just give things normal, logical names that make sense to the type of data that that field is storing. One other thing I'll mention, even though it is automatic in Process Director, and that is your table width. By default, all the tables that you throw into a form will just drop in at 100% width. Keep that. That's fine. There are very few cases where you want to change that. And what the 100% width will do is that the table will just resize to fill up the available horizontal width for whatever viewport the user is looking through. And so if you have somebody who's still on a 1024 by 768 monitor because they're living in 2010, then that's fine. The form will still display for them. In general, not just with forms, but with any object that you place on the page, if possible, ensure that that object has 100% as its width if it is a layout control like a table. And there are some other considerations such as max width that we'll talk about a little bit later, assuming that we get to it, because this does take a long time to explain all this stuff, and we still have two more things we got to look at. Use of colors. It is fine to display status via the use of color. And it does seem to be a not uncommon request from managers, especially senior managers, who are very comfortable with the stoplight format of glancing at something and determining what its status is. And so you will often see, hey, if there's a problem with it, I'd like to see it with a red icon somewhere, or if it can't be approved, or if there's something that needs special attention, it needs to be yellow. If everything is fine, it needs to be green. And that's great. There's nothing that says you can't do that. However, there is something that says that when you do that, color cannot be the only method that you use to convey status. So if you're going to use color to convey status, you must also provide actual text on the page that provides a text status that is cognizable outside of just the color. So in this particular case, okay, here's my training status. It is not complete. I want to see that as yellow. That's fine. You can see it as yellow, but you're also going to need to see the text not completed. Same thing with green, same thing with red. I also want you to note that all of these colors are contrasting. So I'm using a dark red text over a light yellow background. Or in this case, I don't know whether that's a dark green text. I think it's a dark green text. I don't actually remember what I did, but all of my text colors and background colors are all compliant. Red and yellow is the problem. The red does need to be darker because yellow and the normal red color, FF00, no, 0000FF for red, that normal bright red color, that bright cherry red, not quite enough contrast with yellow. So we have to go with a little lighter yellow and a little darker red. But again, we're enforcing that color contrast. So you can use color for status, but it has to have a text representation. You have to ensure that that the colors, if you're going to do it the way that I've done it, with foreground and background colors, we need to be sure that those meet our 1 to 4 point or 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. Actually, the way they say it, it's just contrast ratio. Error identification. If somebody does something wrong on the form, oh, well, I can't do that here. So let's run the form again. And I don't want to make any saves here. I just want to run the form. You know what? I should probably just keep a version of this open instead of constantly closing it. That would probably make my life a lot easier. But when the form runs, and I am going to put in a validation rule for this field, right? So the user enters the field and they hit submit form. I've got a problem with this form field in that I inadvertently did put an S in there, but it was not a capital S, so it failed validation. Now, this is a custom validation rule that I've created. When you create custom validation rules, now there are some built into Process Director, right? If you don't fill out a required field, it'll tell you this field is required. If you're going to create, however, like I've done, a custom validation rule, then the error message that you provide for the custom validation rule needs to be one that tells the user how they can correct that error. So, in this case, the error field must start with a capital letter S in order to be submitted. So that tells me that even though I have a small s here, this is not going to be submittable until I put in a large S. So I need to ensure that the error messages that I provide in my validation rules tell the user how they can correct the error that is preventing them from submitting the form. So you have to give users clear instructions. So on the form, when you go into the validation rules tab, you need to be sure that the message that you provide here is a helpful message, not it. The user already knows they've made a mistake. They already know that this form is not submitting. Telling them you must re-enter the data in this field. That's not helpful. They already know that. What they don't know is what data they need to enter in that field to make all of this go away like a bad dream. Now, by default, these error messages are placed at the top and bottom of the form. So normally an error message will appear at the very top of the form and the very bottom of the form. You can overwrite that. There is the form error string control, and it doesn't really have any configuration other than its name, but you can have more than one form error string on a control. You can have as many as you want. And that error string is where the error messages will appear. So in this case, I have co-located the error string with the control itself. That's okay, but you should probably have top and bottom error messages as well. The purpose of the form error string is to allow you to place additional error message locations on other spots on the page. Now, in this case, I've only got one form error string, so this is the only place on the page that the validation error messages will appear. That might be fine for this specific control if this is the only control that is ever going to be validated on this form, which on this form happens to be true. But just remember, if I put a form error string anywhere on the form, it is going to automatically remove the auto location that Process Director uses to stick it at the very top and the very bottom of the form. So you may wish to relocate that error string. And you may wish to do that anyway, because if you don't have the form error string, I'm gonna hate doing this, but I'm gonna pull it off of the form, and I am going to save the form. And once I save it, I'm going to put it back. But once it's saved, I should have no form error string on the form. So let's wait for it to save. Once it saves, I'm going to reload this form. Once it saves, there we go. It has saved. So real quick, let me go down here and let me stick it back on, but not save it so that I can go over here and I can reload. So let's refresh this form. Okay, so now I'm going to submit my form. Okay, so here is my error field there at the bottom of the form, and there it is at the very, very top of the form. If you're going to put a error field in a specific location, then you're going to need to also, I would strongly suggest that you place one at the very top of the form. And the reason that you would place one at the very top of the form, no matter where else you might place it elsewhere on the form, is so that when the form reloads, the user automatically sees the error messages, because the form, when it reloads, will reload to the top of the form. At the bottom, it's not as important, I don't think, although if you're going to place an error string like we have here, then I think you would also want to place one immediately above the button area control on the form. And yes, every form should have a button area control. It's not really an accessibility thing, but it's certainly a best practice thing, because it gives you control over where your buttons appear for your task completion buttons. And that also enables you just to drop a form error string right in front of the form buttons, so that in addition to being at the top, if you're going to put it at the bottom, it should be right above the buttons themselves. So that if the user scrolls down to see the buttons, if for whatever reason he just decides, I'm going to ignore this thing at the top of the page, and by golly, I'm going to resubmit again, and they scroll down to the bottom, and that's sort of the way that we do it. We place it above the form action buttons, and that's where you should place it, because I don't really have any excuse for clicking the submit form button when I've got that big ugly light yellow and red error message telling me that things have gone horribly wrong, I really do need to make that correction. So that should be how that. So that's just something to think about whenever you're thinking about your error strings on your form. So let me push this back over here so that I can access it later. Buttons. A lot of people think that buttons that just have icons on them are cool. And I guess they are. They're also a violation of accessibility standards. If it is possible, you should have a text representation on the button. So let's look at the actual form here. So this is the preferred way of dropping a button control on a form. Please note the tooltip control that pops up here and that pops up here. If possible, you want to have explicit text on your button. You do not just want it to be an icon the way that this button is here. However, that's one of those where possible. That's one of those should guidelines, not one of those must guidelines. It simply may not be possible within the constraints of your form's design and the width of the viewport that the users are using. It may not be possible to always ensure that you have an explicit text label on the button. So while buttons should have a text label, that gets really, really space heavy if I need to do like navigation buttons. I have an up, a down, left, a right, an X for delete. I need to stick 5 buttons at the end of a row on a table. And if I try to do it with these text labels, that's going to be ugly. Or my table row is going to be, 6 inches tall because I've got all of these buttons that I have arrayed, vertically in the cell as some method of trying to make them look good. So there may be, for design reasons, there may be good reasons for just having a small button that just has an icon. So if you have to, you can do it this way. What you do need to ensure, and with this version, my buttons aren't showing up, so I can't actually, that button exists, but I can't click on it. Oh, that's really inconvenient. Wait, I almost had it. I'm looking down here at the very bottom to see if I'm hitting the button. And I am not. It is a text button and it only has a white icon. It has no text, which means it has no space on the page. This is something that needs to be fixed. I'm not sure if it does this in my other server that we're going to look at in a minute on .400, but it certainly makes it hard to touch that button here. All right, fine. We'll just go to this button that has text label on it. Again, buttons have alt tags. So you actually need to be using the alt tag for that button so that you can see whatever the text label is. It gets repeated in that alt tag. Once again, that alt tag, even for buttons that don't have text. Now, they should, because what's going to happen on this particular button is that its text label is actually going to be read, which in this case is literally the words text label. So this is going to get read aloud to the user so that they know what this button is. If there is no text property for the button, so I don't have an explicit text that's showing on the page, then we're going to fall back to alt tag, and the alt tag will read whatever is in the alt tag. So either way, I have a way for the visually impaired to know what that button does when Process Director reaches it. And so as you see here for this button, the alt tag for this button is icon only button. That's not very helpful, although it is very descriptive because it describes what this button does. This button doesn't actually do anything other than display with only an icon. So I guess that is the appropriate alt text. Now, for button area controls, we handle all that for you. We have the appropriate colors. We have the actual text representation that appears on the button. So this all works the way that it's supposed to work. In the background, these are obviously JavaScript buttons. So as you can see at the very bottom of the page, all the JavaScript stuff pops up. But our colors and contrast and everything are set the way that they're supposed to be set. Now, previously, when I submitted the form, so I guess we'll just go ahead and submit this one so that we can see it again. Once that form is submitted, inside my process timeline, I've also got to be sure that I set the appropriate colors and the appropriate contrast between text. Now, because these are result buttons, my result text, whatever it happens to be, is automatically going to be placed on the button by Process Director as the button text for that button. All I have to worry about is in Process Director is whenever I am inside the process timeline and I start creating those results in the process timeline, I need to ensure that my configuration for each of those results on the options tab for that result has the appropriate background and text colors that that supply the appropriate contrast between foreground and background. So that's just another accessibility thing that you're responsible for. Now, let's talk about responsiveness specifically. We'll talk about Bootstrap a little bit later. Let's just talk about responsiveness. And I've got a couple of little examples here. There are some CSS tips and tricks that you can apply. Actually, I need to close this form so that I can open this one. So let me go back a step. Well, that's a step too far. Let me go back to responsiveness here. Let's run this form and we'll put it out of the way for now while we're running it. Let's actually look at the form. Wrong form. Responsive form. That's the one I want. So let's look at it. So I've got a couple of little CSS tricks in here. And I've got these CSS tricks in here for text reasons. So let's take a look at this text right here. This is headline text that takes up a significant portion of this page. And let's make my page, well, you can't see it because I'm really scrolling off the screen, but let's make this page wider. And notice what is happening with my text up there. Oh, I guess I don't know if you can see it actually moving in Zoom, so I should probably pause. So now my text is this size, and if I make it bigger, now my text is significantly bigger. I'm not happy with the size that I've chosen on this. I should probably go in and change it a little bit. But the important thing is, if my page gets to that size, I guess the reason why I did it was so I could show you the changeover. I have some let's look at it here. I've got this CSS right here. See the CSS? And there is a sizing called the viewpoint width element, or it's a sizing attribute, the viewpoint width, that I can put on, in this case, text, although you could do it with images or with any other thing. So what I've done is I've applied that viewpoint width. Now, or viewport width. Now, the thing about viewport width is it's expandable. It is a proportion of the page. And so for bigger pages, the text gets bigger. For smaller pages, it gets smaller. There are some drawbacks to using it. If we get to a certain size, that text gets awfully small. And in fact, it's no longer a header. So I would probably need to tinker around with my CSS a bit. But once I get to a certain size, it resizes itself through the CSS that I have. So there are some little CSS tricks that you can toss on to text to make it resize to meet the proper proportion that you want on the page. So that's what I've done here with my H1 style. And what I've done is I've put 2 breakpoints on my page. So I said, look, if my page gets down to, so these are called media queries. And basically what it allows you to do is change the size of things when the viewport width, the width of the screen that the user is using to look at your form. So with this one, I have 2. I've got a media query at 800 pixels, and I have one at 400 pixels. And if you don't even really fully know what these things do or what the syntax is, you can just kind of copy this and use it for yourself. This is a media query, and in this case, the query specifies, here's what I want to happen when my screen is 400 pixels wide at its minimum, and here's what I want to happen whenever my minimum width is 800 pixels wide. So when I make my screen width smaller than 800 pixels, it's going to jump and do different things in my CSS. If I make it smaller than 400 pixels, it's going to do it again. And so in each case, all I'm doing is I am changing the size of the font size for my H1 heading 1 text so that it just changes the viewport width that I'm using based on my screen size. So I can actually make text and other objects sort of resize for my screen. Again, we format our tables so we can reformat the tables whenever the screen gets small. We've already seen that, so there's no reason to belabor that point. We don't use images very often in a process director form, I grant you. But if you are going to use images, there are a couple of properties that are important. So notice this image. This is actually quite a large image, and I don't think the horizontal size doesn't matter. But note that as I change my screen size, that image still stays. So if I'm down looking at this on a phone, I still have my image and I still have the full image. Now, obviously this image has a maximum size. So while I am making my screen bigger, which you can see if you look at the top of the form and you look at the location of the form controls, I'll make them bigger again. You can see that that picture is not changing its size because it does have a fixed maximum size. But if I make my form smaller, then my image starts to get smaller. What I have done for this, just to be sure that I display it fully on the page, is I've given it its own style. So for the image itself, if I go into the image control and I go into the advanced, there is a style control, and there is a CSS property called max width. So if I want an element to fill the screen, no matter what size it is, max width is great, because what it says is, like, this is an image, and I don't remember how big this image is, but it's at least 1920 by 1080, right? So this is a fairly big image. And I obviously can't show it at 1920 by 1080 on every screen, certainly not on a tablet or a phone or what have you. So I do want to show the whole image, but I don't want to have to force people to scroll left and right to see the thing. And I probably don't want to show it at full size. So I'm going to set max width, which says, look, this image is 1920 pixels wide. If you got a screen that is big enough to show it, great. I'm going to show it to you at full size. And by default, that's how I want to show it to you. But If your screen is less than 1920 pixels wide, then the max I can display is at 100% of the screen width. And so no matter what size screen you have, the max width CSS property will automatically just resize the image so that it can be seen. In fact, I think it works in the Online Form Designer. If I close the design console, it fills the entire page. And then if I go way back over here to the right and I turn the design console back on, when the design console comes back on, it automatically resizes itself. So the max width is kind of cool. At the very bottom of this form, there's a little more trickery. And if you look at these two forms, so what I have are two tables. I said two forms. That's not what they are. They're two tables. So let's scroll down and we'll look at these two tables. I just have gibberish in these two tables. And if I put them together, we're going to hit our break point, and those two tables are now going to be displayed side by side in Process Director. And eventually, if I make it small enough, boom, they're going to be displayed one on top of each other. And past a certain size, well, past a certain size, obviously, it's not going to display right. But how did I do this? Well, again, this is a little trickery. And we talked about layout before, and I talked about using tables as layout. We're just going to take a look at this. I'm not going to get, especially at 1136, I am not going to get into the weeds of how div tags and stuff work. But what I've got are two tables, and I've got 3 HTML controls that I've thrown onto here. And so here's what I want to happen. The very first HTML control creates a div tag, a division tag, basically a block of text or a block of content on my form. And I've given it a style, float left. And what that means is I want everything inside this div tag to float on the left side of the page. What that means is that it will always be on the left. And if there are other objects that might be able to fit in beside it, those objects will appear on the right of it. This will always be on the left-hand margin of the page, this div tag. And this div tag contains this entire table. And then I've got a second HTML control. And this HTML control says, okay, I'm going to end the first div tag. So it provides me, I have a start now and an end for this very first division on the form. And then it's going to start another div tag, but this time it says float right. So what that means is if there is enough space that this table will just automatically, if this div tag here becomes narrow enough, which it will whenever Process Director refactors. So I'm kind of depending on how Process Director works to make this work. When Process Director refactors, there will be enough space whenever this div tag is showing as a single column table rather than a 2-column table. Because remember, at a certain screen width, Process Director is going to refactor this table and show it in a single column. That means that this table, which will be displayed on the left, will be narrow enough for the second table, this table down here in this second division, which is set to float right. It will actually pop up and float to the right of the first table. So both of these two tables, rather than being stacked vertically the way they are here, whenever I hit that 800 pixel screen width and Process Director refactors both of these tables, boom, they're going to refactor and they're going to sit up right next to each other. And they're going to stay there until the screen becomes so small that I there's not enough physical space for them to sit next to each other, at which point the second table will once again flop over to a vertical array and will sit behind or sit below the first table, which we just saw happen a minute ago. And the final, last HTML control that I have is the end div tag for the second control. So basically, I'm creating two divisions, which, as we saw, will appear vertically stacked. So here's table 1, here's table 2, and once I hit my 800 pixel screen width and Process Director refactors the table, there is table 1, and there is table 2. And so this is floating on the left. This div tag is floating on the right. And once they get close enough together, now this is the float messes up the buttons. So let's ignore that for now. The important thing is, let's look at the tables, and this is about the maximum that they can sit on the same row side by side. So now again, we'll flop down to the next line. So you can see the first table is floating to the left. This table is floating to the right. It's interfering with the buttons, so I'd probably need to fiddle with the HTML a little bit more, but you can see I can change the behavior simply by using div tags and applying CSS styles for how I want my responsive table to look. Ideally, if I'm looking at it on a phone, this is what I would want to see. And it does that, although obviously, I guess if it's an old Nokia, it'll look ugly, but nobody's still using this. But anyway, that's one set of examples of just pure responsiveness that you can put into the form. Now, so far we've been talking about all the normal Process Director stuff and the way that we implement that there, the way that we normally implement it in just a regular old Process Director form. But there is an alternative. If you know Bootstrap, and we're not going to talk about Bootstrap for too long, and in fact at 11:42 we couldn't talk about it for too long. If you know Bootstrap, there is and it's turned off by default because most people don't know Bootstrap, and most people don't want to get into it because they're not HTML people. But if you're HTML people and you're familiar with Bootstrap, then you might want to use it. There is a custom variable, and I don't remember what the name of that custom variable is right off the top of my head. So we'll just do a quick search for Bootstrap. I think it's F enable Bootstrap, but I want to be sure that I have that right. No, it is F include Bootstrap. So I'm glad I looked it up. So this custom variable, when set to true, gives you access to the responsive layout menu. So if you don't have that custom variable set to true, you simply will not see any of these controls. However, once you set it true, it gives you access to the responsive layout controls. The responsive layout controls are an implementation of the Bootstrap CSS framework. In its simplest terms, the Bootstrap CSS framework is a series of container controls into which you would put content of some kind. That content could be text, as it is here, or that content could be a Process Director control of some kind, as it is up here. Every control or every bit of text, or in this case, since there are also section controls, it's both text and controls, they all need to go into a container. There is an outer control called the container control that is the sort of the page control for Bootstrap. So basically this gray box that goes around everything. Um, you can see it all the way around. That gray box is my container control. There are a couple of different types of container controls, one of which is uh, it's a I keep wanting to say adaptive. That's not it. It's an automatically size control. It's a percentage control. It doesn't have a fixed width. It just changes according to what your screen width is. And then there is, and that is the container fluid, which I never use because I hate the container fluid control. I prefer the container control. The container control displays at a fixed width, so I get a predictable form. However, if the user's looking at it on a smaller viewport, then Bootstrap just automatically refactors everything to show in that smaller form. The trouble with the container fluid is if I open up a form on my monitor, because I've got a 32-inch monitor or 36-inch monitor, if I open up a form using container fluid as the outer container control, then it's going to want to expand to be 30 inches wide, which means that all of my controls will have 5 inches of space between them. It's going to look ugly. I use the container control because it gives me a fixed max width. And if my screen is smaller, everything just, shrinks down and refactors itself to fit on that smaller screen. But if somebody sees it on a huge screen, it has a maximum size on it. And inside that container, I put in primarily, there are other controls, but the primary controls you need for layout is you need a form row control. There's also a row control, but because we're going to be throwing in form controls, we're going to want to use form row controls. And then there are form group controls, which are the columns. So the form row is a row. So I've got my container. I can throw in a row control. So in this case, I've thrown in a row control. It's just a plain row control because all I got is my title here. The next row that I throw in, I'm going to throw in a form row because it's going to contain a form group and form controls inside each form group. So in a row control, I can throw in a column. In a form row, I can throw in a form group. Both of those are a type of column controls, and I can have a maximum of 12 columns in Bootstrap inside my container. The nice thing about Bootstrap is it's all div tags. And unlike trying to use tables for layout, what this enables me to do is just throw in, form row 1, and form row 1 can have 3 controls, and form row 2 can have 5 controls, and form row 3 can have 2 controls. I don't have to live inside this very restricted and constrained table format where everything has to be, perfectly symmetrical. If I start off with 4 columns, it's always going to have 4 columns on the page. I don't have to live with that. Every row is independent. So if I want to throw in different form rows, or different numbers of control on each row, I just throw in a form row, and then I just pop in 3, 4, 5 form groups. And when I throw them in, Bootstrap actually controls where they show up. It knows where the form group should be. It knows how wide they should be. It makes things a little bit easier from that perspective. So if I was just so I have this sample one that has a whole bunch of different types of examples where I've got arrays and I've got cards and I've got tab controls and accordions and all kinds of stuff on here. You want a copy of this, fine. Although it isn't going to run on your system unless you use the f-include bootstrap custom variable to enable Bootstrap on your system. But simply, if we go ahead and close this form, and I'm just going to go ahead and close it without saving. And we'll just go here to webinar. That's my webinar form. Actually, don't want to be in that form. Let's turn my content list on. Let's go back over here to responsive layout. Let me delete this real quick. So I am just going to slap a couple of responsive layout controls on a new form. So we'll just go to new form definition. We'll go to RL. We'll hit OK. So here's my RL form. I have my responsive layout controls. So now I am going to turn off the content list. So I'm just going to go to responsive layout. I'm going to drop a container control on there. When I do, my cursor is automatically going to be inside the container control. So in this case, I'd probably drop a row control in. And then I might drop in a couple of columns because I'm in a regular row control. So I'm not going to have any form controls. So let's drop in a couple of column controls. In fact, let's drop in another column control. So as I drop them in with the cursor remaining in the same location, it's just automatically going to place them right where it needs to place them. So now if I'm going to put in some controls, I need to be in let's just throw in a form row. Oh, yeah, wrong place. There we go. Let me add a row because I need to get my cursor down here in there. And then we'll go with form row. And so here I can just go with, let's go with form group 1. Oops, I need to be there. Sorry. Responsive layout, form group 1 and form group 2 and 3 and 4. Great. And then let's just drop in some controls in each of these form groups. I'm not even going to worry about labels or anything like that in the interest of time. We're just doing a quick demo of responsive layout. And so we'll go down to the next row and we'll just drop in one more row. So we'll drop in one more form row and then we'll go inside that form row and then we'll drop in form group, and form group. And we'll drop in a couple of more controls into each form group. And up here, because this is, we'll just throw in some text because those are just regular rows and columns. We'll give ourselves a couple of lines of text here. And so now I've basically got a form. Well, obviously I don't quite have a form. So let me throw in another form row, and inside that form row, I will throw in one form group. And inside that form group, I will drop in a button area control. Okay, so now I've got a form that's done in Bootstrap, and we can now just run our form and see what it looks like. When you're working in Bootstrap, you really do need to have a very good idea of what your form looks like ahead of time, and you need to keep to that design. Bootstrap is kind of tedious to work with. Even if you know what you're doing. So a word to the wise, have your form design out there. Now, the cool thing about this is, it changes all of my button sizes and styles and stuff, changes my control sizes and styles and how they work. But as you can see up here, I've got my 3 columns. We're cool with that. Right here on this row, I've got my 4 process director controls. On the row below that, I've got 3 process director controls. So the controls also fill up the entire width of the form group. So you just have these narrow margins between the form controls. Obviously, if this was a real form, I would be throwing in labels and whatnot for that form. But as you can see, it's kind of flexible. And again, the cool thing about Bootstrap is that as you change sizes, the controls automatically resize. If I make it smaller than the container size, which you can see is basically this width here, that's my container size. If my form gets bigger, my container has a max size that it reaches. If my form gets smaller than the container, everything just refactors. So here my controls got smaller. And now once I hit my breakpoint, there we go. Now this is a little different breakpoint. Everything just shrank. My container shrank, so all of my internal control shrank. So let's see that. So here we go. This shows me what happens is I have a minimum margin inside Bootstrap on my page. This reaches the minimum margin. Once I break that, then it refactors the page, resizes everything, resizes the container control, and gives me a wider margin. Eventually, it's going to go back to a single row. And in this case, I've got all of these form fields now in a single column, but these text fields, because they can resize easier, are still in 3 columns. And so I'll keep the text, but now notice the text has gone, I'm real small now. So I've got my 3rd column here, my 2nd column here, my 1st column here. It's just refactoring everything for me automatically. And ultimately I can just throw everything into a single column, although there's no device that has a screen that small. So the Bootstrap controls, if you know Bootstrap and you're willing to deal with some frustration with dealing with the controls because they are not controls like a process director control. They don't have, the process director controls are selectable, but the Bootstrap controls are not. They don't have properties. They all fulfill their Bootstrap things. And also, if I want to change anything or move things around, I got to go into the HTML source to start messing with stuff. If you don't know HTML, that gets tricky. So, danger, 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 as the Crocodile Hunter used to say. If you're going to use this, you should know what you're doing. And it's not really something that I can probably teach you in a couple of minutes or even a couple of hours. You're really going to have some familiarity with HTML, CSS, and in general with the Bootstrap framework. So if you don't have those things, this is probably not a great option for you. If you are an HTML sort of guru type, then maybe a perfectly fine option for you. Up to you. All right, well, that's it. That is our webinar for today. We have taken up all of our allotted time, so we must say goodbye. I will look forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, so long.